Good morning.
Welcome to First Parish in Hingham, also known as Old Ship Church. I'm Trish McAleer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. As Unitarian Universalists, we gather here as an open community that honors freedom of belief, encourages spiritual growth in ourselves and our children, and shares the wisdom of the many religious traditions with reverence for the earth and in service to humanity. We gather here on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts people, the original nation of this land. We are mindful that for the Massachusetts people of every generation, this land is sacred. If you are visiting or newly attending our services, welcome. You and everyone else are welcome to gather for coffee and conversation just down the street at 14 Main. Please note in your order of worship this week's scheduled events here at Old Ship. If you have any questions, please stop by the welcome table coffee hour. Also, any member of our board will be happy to answer your questions. We are happy you are with us today. We welcome you to bring all that you are to this congregation. Your beliefs, your traditions, your identity, your story, and the wisdom of your years. You are welcome here. If you are looking for inspiration, comfort, or connection, we hope you will find it here. Our morning service has now begun.
Good morning. I'm Edmund Robinson. I'm the minister. My pronouns are he and him. We have a great astronomical feat happening tomorrow. Some of us are actually on their way now to Texas to see that up close and personal, I suppose. I hope they have good viewing weather. But this poem appeared in the New Yorker this week. It's called The Hymn, H-Y-M-N, by Marie Howe. It began as an almost inaudible hum, low and long for the solar winds and far dim galaxies, a hymn growing louder for the moon and the sun, a song without words for the snow falling, for snow conceiving snow, conceiving rain, the rivers rushing without shame, the hum turning again higher into a riff of ridges, peaks hard as consonants, summits and praise for the rocky faults and crust and crevices, then down, down to the roots and rocks and burrows, the lake's skittery surfaces, wells, oceans, breaking waves, the salt deep, the warm bodies moving within it, the cold deep, the deep underneath gleaming, some of us rising as the planet turned into dawn, some lying down as it turned into dark. As each of us rested, another woke, standing among the cast-off cartons and automobiles. We left the factories and stood in the parking lots, left the subways and stood on sidewalks, in the bright offices, in the cluttered yards, in the farmed fields, in the mud of the shanty towns, breaking into harmonies we'd not known possible, finding the chords as we found our true place, singing in a million keys the human hymn of praise for every something else there is and ever was and will be, the song growing louder and rising. Listen, I too believed it was a dream.
So today's chalice lighting, I was thinking there's a lot going on right now. We're all doing a lot of things. It seems like, again, an exciting, vibrant time. And in keeping with the next few sermons that Edmund's going to be talking about, amplifying the charge, talking about our Unitarian Universalist future, and the, stewardship campaign, which, by the way, I'm on, and where our future is going. I found these words in our hymnal that I thought sort of talk about who we are, where we are, and what we mean to one another. So these words by Walter Royal Jones Jr. Mindful of truth ever exceeding our knowledge and community ever exceeding our practice, reverently we covenant together, beginning with ourselves as we are, to share the strength of integrity and the heritage of the Spirit in the unending quest for wisdom and love.
Our hymn is number 1007 in the Teal hymnal. There's a river flowing in my soul.
Good morning. I'm Claire Petrie and a member of the pastoral care team. At this time, I invite you to share a joy, sorrow, or concern. And if you have a joy, sorrow, or concern to express, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you.
Here I go. Good morning, everybody. I'm Derek. I really don't know how to start this off. I'd like to light a candle, or actually take the liberty of including myself in this candle, because I'm unhappy. I'm sad at what's going on in the world today. We've all been watching the television, and it's hard to believe that over 100,000 people have been maimed and injured. Over 33,000 have been killed. I shouldn't forget the 1,200 Israelis. I also shouldn't forget the Ukrainians that are going through the same kind of thing. I guess it's a simple candle for peace.
Thank you.
Corey Sheher, a candle of gratitude. My mom lives with me and is a devout Catholic, and she had been missing her church for 2.5 years because she has COPD and she was very insecure about being in public. And I just wanted to say thank you for the person that got her there and for the people that welcomed her, and a candle of hope that we can all be a little bit more welcoming, because we don't always know the insecurities that keep people away from things.
I'm sorry, I have to mention of the 5 major religions in the world, 2 of us have just recently commemorated either Easter, and I'm sad to find that Ramadan hasn't been mentioned. Comment.
Elizabeth Torrey, she, her. I would like to light a candle of gratitude for Christopher, our wonderful music wizard, who every single Sunday lifts me up in some way that only music can, but he lifts it up in the only way that he can and does, week after week. Deep gratitude to Christopher.
Thank you.
Hello, Eric from Hingham, pronouns he, him. I want a great big yellow candle of joy for the 2.5-story nasturtium vines at the garden in Boston. Yellow flower, 2.5 stories hanging down all around the garden.
Colin, do you have anybody on Zoom? No. Okay. These candles burn as well for any joys, sorrows, or concerns deeply felt in our hearts, although unexpressed in words. Thank you.
I'll have a silent meditation and to be ended with a prayer. It's a prayer of thanksgiving written by Eugene Pickett, who was president of the UUA for a while and also a parishioner of mine in Chatham. And the response in each time is, we give thanks this day. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, we give thanks this day. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, we give thanks this day. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, we give thanks this day. For our human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, we give thanks this day. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, we give thanks this day. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom, we give thanks this day. For human liberty and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose, we give thanks this day. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds.
Time of sorrow, we Good morning. This is an excerpt from the charge to the Unitarian Universalist Association's Article 2 Study Commission from the Unitarian Universalist Association's board. The Article 2 Study Commission is hereby charged to review Article 2 of the UUA bylaws and propose any revisions that will enable our UUA, our member congregations, and our covenanted communities to be a relevant and powerful force for spiritual and moral growth, healing, and justice. Proposed changes should articulate core Unitarian Universalist theological values. The board believes that one core theological value shared widely among Unitarian Universalists is love. The Commission on Appraisal, in its report titled Engaging Our Theological Diversity, cites Robert Miller's study of Unitarian Universalism, stating that Unitarian Universalists ranked loving as an instrumental value and mature love as a terminal value more highly than did respondents from other groups, both religious and non-religious. Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. Our commitment to personal, institutional, and cultural change rooted in anti-oppression, anti-racism, and multiculturalism values and practices is love in action, and it should be centered in any revision of Article 2. The new principles and purposes should guide us in the transformation of ourselves, our communities, and our faith into active networks of collective care, restoration, and justice. The principles and purposes you will prepare should be a living document that challenges Unitarian Universalists to place the liberation in all of its dimensions of all at the center of our lives. They should be honest about the past, name what we are facing and our aspirations and where we hope to be, not just for today, but looking out at the horizons. They should ask us to choose love in action as the path forward. Our commitment to anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multiculturalism is love in action and should be centered in any revision of Article 2. Finally, the principles and purposes should lead us into the second quarter of the 21st century while honoring the historic roots of our liberal, progressive faith. We therefore charge this commission to root its work in love as a principal guide in its work, attending particularly to the ways that we and our root traditions have understood and have articulated love, and how we have acted out in love.
Let us now receive the offering for the advancement of the ministries of this church. Amplifying the charge. 1. Who am I? This is the first of 3 or perhaps 4 sermons on whether we want to change the principles and purposes of Unitarian Universalism. You can see the present version of the principles and purposes if you open your gray hymnal to a page just after the preface, and you will see a page starting with the words, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, ... Under this preamble, you will find 7 phrases which complete the sentence just started. And under that, you will find a list of sources on which UUs draw for inspiration. In case you're not as familiar with it as you'd like to be, I will pause at this point to let you reread it. Need more time? Okay. This package of words was drafted in 1984 because 23 years after the Unitarian and Universalist denominations merged, UUs were still being asked the question, but what do you believe in? But Unitarian and Universalist history shows that both denominations before merger allowed for a lot of room for individual beliefs. And the intention of drafting these words was not to impose a standard by which you could kick somebody out of a church, whether layperson or clergy, but to articulate the values which motivated and guided us. Many Orthodox Christian denominations say a creed every Sunday, which goes back to the Council of Nicaea in 324 of the Common Era. UUs don't have a denominational creed in that sense, though if you come back in early June, you will see that the teenagers enrolled in the Coming of Age program will favor us with their individual statements of belief. I grew up as an Episcopalian, and I can still remember the words of the Nicene Creed. The word credo means I believe, and by reciting the creed, one was affirming a belief in those things. They were statements of fact: the virgin birth, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, the life everlasting. These were things the worshiper was affirming a belief in. By contrast, the principles and purposes of the UUs are in the form of a covenant. We covenant to affirm and promote these values. That's a promise. Take the first principle, for instance, which is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Worth and dignity are not questions of fact. By covenanting with your fellow UUs across the world, you are not stating that everyone has inherent worth and dignity. You are promising to behave as if they do. It's an ethical statement, not an ontological one. When the principles and purposes were approved by the General Assembly in 1984, they came with a stipulation that they would be revisited every so often to see if they needed to be updated. That has happened twice since their enactment, and both times the denomination voted to keep them unchanged. But the year 2017 was kind of a watershed in UU history. There was an issue over racial discrimination in hiring for a top leadership position. and the president and a lot of the top leaders resigned. As the issue concerned race, a temporary governing body was formed consisting of 3 black leaders, one of whom was the former president, and another of whom is our current president. There was concern that we were not doing enough as an association which claims to be committed to racial equity to do away with what some call structural racism and others call white supremacy culture. Some people responded to this concern by working on an 8th principle devoted solely to racism. At the same time, others noted that the principles and purposes were overdue for a general review. When the original principles and purposes were adopted, they were inserted in various pieces of literature, in the hymnal, and on the walls of many UU houses of worship. But they were also put into the organization's bylaws, where they are designated as Article 2. It isn't legally necessary to put faith statements into governing documents of a religious organization, but it was kind of poetic that we UUs did so because we consider that both denominations historically are founded on covenant. More about that later. So the idea of reworking the entire principles and purposes had more appeal than adding another principle, an 8th principle, to address race. But that's what we're doing now. There was a charge given by the UUA board to the study commission on Article 2. And what we and many of our neighbor UU congregations are doing this spring is to explore a study guide, which is supposed to amplify that charge. You know, I'm not always pleased when the denominational headquarters undertakes to draft materials for a worship service, but I was pleased this time because this congregation is facing many challenges. And I think that the exercise of looking at these basic tenets with which we've become so familiar over the years may give us all a better vision of what we're doing here. With that context, I want to start with the suggested theme. Who am I? In a sense, this is the broadest question we can ever ask about ourselves. It's so broad, almost any answer you give to it will be meaningless until you set a little context and narrow it down. Who am I? What do you mean? Do you want my name, my nationality, my political orientation, my tribe? Do you want my academic standing, what I do for a living, my position in my nuclear family? Do you want my preferred pronouns, my favorite songs or tunes, best recipes, favorite games or TV shows? The psychologist Erik Erikson in the 1940s came up with a concept which is useful in developmental psychology, identity crisis. An identity crisis can arise when there are changes in our lives and we don't know exactly who we are anymore. We learn to depend on milestones which tell us who we are. But what happens when there's a change in one's basic circumstances? Going to a different school, or graduating, or taking the first job, getting married, living through the separation or divorce of your parents. You form a notion of who you are in one environment, and then the environment changes. I can remember when I went to a small private school for elementary school that my father had helped establish. And I went from there to the public junior high school that had about 6 times as many people, which was going from being a big fish in a small pond to being a small fish in what looked like a very big pond, just as I was physically entering my adolescence. A person going through an identity crisis may lose some of the milestones which tell us who we are. But is this a surface phenomenon, or are we actually turning into different people? The great Massachusetts poet Stanley Kunitz wrote a poem called The Layers, in which he sums up his life, which addresses this question. It starts like this: I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I once was, though some core of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. Is there a core in us which remains constant while other aspects of us change? Is the question, who am I, to be answered differently on different days? Do the changing circumstances of my life change who I am deep down inside? The Greek philosopher Heraclitus believed that everything changes except change itself. It was he who said you never step into the same river twice. And he might have added that it's not only a different river the second time, it's a different you. Another great thinker who taught that everything is impermanent was the Buddha. Have you ever watched a Buddhist Lama work for 3 days on a sand mandala, only to have him simply dump it over when he is done to demonstrate its impermanence? There is a Buddhist doctrine called anatta, the non-self, which holds that there is no permanent self, no permanent you or I. We put on a personality every morning the way we put on clothes, but it is only out of habit. At least theoretically, we could choose to be a different person if we were very mindful about it. And it is the craving and clinging to this delusional self which causes suffering in Buddhist theory. So in a sense, when a good Buddhist asks the big question we're considering, who am I? The answer could be no one, because there's no self asking the question, no self answering, and no self who is the subject of the question. But that doesn't jibe with Dr. Erickson's identity crisis. I have observed in my 24 years in ministry that we have a big problem in this denomination holding on to young people as they age. Youth and teenagers who have come up through congregational life and gone to youth cons and participated in OWL and coming of age with great enthusiasm, they may love the quality of life that our congregation gave them, but now they're off to college. A classic transition, and in Erickson's terms, an occasion for an identity crisis. Yes, if they were so Buddhist that they didn't feel that they had permanent selves, that would be one thing. But in American culture, adolescence is a time when one relies heavily on one's peers to build and sustain identity. Very few of us come up with an answer to who am I entirely on our own. So typically in a UU's biography, there will be lost years. My own 2 children have only been inside UU churches in recent decades if they are attending a service having to do with their father. Many of you have had the same experience, I know. I see this as one of our most basic problems, and one which does not bode well for the demographics of the future, which is why I'm trying to look at this Article 2 question not only from a boomer perspective, but from the perspective of younger generations. Stanley Kunitz continued his poem, The Layers, this way: when I look behind, as I am compelled to look, before I can gather the strength to proceed on my journey, I see the milestones dwindling toward the horizon and the slow fires trailing from the abandoned campsites over which scavenger angels wheel on heavy wings. Oh, I have made myself a tribe out of my true affections, and my tribe is scattered. How shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? In a rising wind, the manic dust of my friends, those who fell along the way, bitterly stings my face. It is not only the young, of course, who suffer identity crises, but the old as well. As we lose friends to illness and death, we old folks wonder who we are, particularly if we have let the social set we belong to define us. We have made a tribe of our true affections. Now, generations have become very important in American culture, largely because the pace of economic and technological change continues to accelerate. So that for all of us, the experience of growing up and the ability to adapt to change becomes more challenging with each passing year. If a stable society produces identity crises, how much more does a rapidly changing society do so? Who's going to help me program my cell phone? The UUA authors who drafted this Amplifying the Charge exercise suggested this theme, who am I, as a topic for the first sermon. But I also wonder if a more important question is, do I belong here? If you had gone to an Easter service last Sunday and everyone was greeting each other with the phrase, the Lord is risen, to which the answer was given, he is risen indeed, but you happen to be a person who doesn't believe Jesus was physically brought back from the dead on Easter Sunday 2,000 years ago, you might question whether you belong in that particular church. How do you know if you belong in one group or another? Well, I want to look now at the proposed Article 2 replacement text. As you may know, the Study Commission has eliminated the structure of the principles and purposes and replaced it with 7 values, which it presents in a graphic shape. The central value is love, and that is at the center of a flower with a flaming chalice representing it and the word love. The other 6 values are petals arranged around the center. Next week, I'll have this graphically for you so that you can look at it. The other 6 values are petals arranged around the center. For each of these, there's a text which amplifies that value. Let me give you an example. One of the values is transformation. Transformation. The amplifying text for this value is as follows. Quote, we adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. End quote. I really like that, never complete and never perfect. Many times I've preached on the blessings of imperfection. I've also done a lot of thinking and a lot of preaching about evolution in my time in ministry. And I think these few compact lines do a lot to encapsulate the idea of change. We're not only passive recipients of the changing river, but we are also change agents to help bring about the beloved community on earth, in this life, not in some hereafter in heaven. While the structure of the 1984 principles and purposes has been altered, there are aspects with which echo the old familiar rhetoric. For example, did you notice the word covenant in the sentence regarding transformation that I just read? The 1984 principles and purposes had that word in the preamble so that grammatically it applied to each of the 7 principles. We, the members congregations of the UUA, do hereby covenant to affirm and promote, ... The commission here has taken out the preamble, but each of the 6 amplification sentences commits us to covenant in some way appropriate to that value. Thus, the word covenant has become sort of like action items on the minutes of a meeting. The things we're supposed to do and not just talk about doing. And this usage may be truer to the meaning of covenant than its placement in the 1984 version. I've talked a lot about covenant here. It is an ancient word going back to the Hebrew Bible. In the book of Genesis, God made several covenants with one or more humans. Our Puritan ancestors modified these divine covenants to make horizontal covenants, governing who would be allowed to do what in the new religious communities they were founding. The beloved building in which we meet today is a concrete instantiation of covenant. And I think it's quite clever and moving that the Study Commission has figured out a way to bring this honorable and ancient word forward into the decades ahead. Who am I? Who are we? We're the church without a creed. We're the church which welcomes everyone. We're the church based on covenant, which is always subject to new examination and modification by democratic processes. I want to close this sermon with the full roll call of the 6 values and the description of each. Next week, we'll have these in the order of service so that you can compare it visually with the 1984 version. Remember that love is at the center. Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. If you've, like me, you've already forgotten what the subject is by the time you get to the end of the paragraph. Interdependence is the subject of that particular one. The next one is pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. Again, on pluralism, we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Okay, so we've had interdependence, and we've had pluralism. The next one is justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. That was justice. The next one is transformation, which I've already read to you. Transformation, we adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Okay, the next one is generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. And you see, that's borrowing a value from 3 values back, that weaving the values in a nice little, what to me is a very nice aesthetic way. And the last one was equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. So there's your inherent worth and dignity, inherent dignity and worthiness. And the covenant part of that is we covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. My comment on rereading this, my feeling was that I was making alarm bells for nothing. That I think most of the real germ that's in our present 1984 system is in this draft as well. But I'll be interested in what you all think as we get deeper into it. So that's the amplified charge as I can amplify it today. Thank you for listening. Our closing hymn, What Wondrous Love Is This, number 18.
What wondrous love is this?
chalice by reciting the words in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not now the light of the truth, the warmth of unity, or the fire of wickedness. These carry in our hearts until we are together. The love and the work of friends and lovers belong to the task and are its help. Rest and rejoicing belong to the task and are its grace. Let tomorrow come tomorrow. Not by your will is the house carried through the night. Amen. Blessed be.